VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
Well, thank you, Mr. Morris, and good to have you with us on Crosstalk today. And we've got an interesting topic and an interesting guest. In fact, our guest is Dr. Don DeYoung, is the president of the Creation Research Society and chairman of the Department of Physical Science at Grace College in Winona Lake, Indiana. And we're going to be talking about a book called Astronomy and the Bible. Now, as a kid, I remember my dad got one of these kits where you could buy the lenses, and they said, well, if you take some metal tubing and you did it the right way, you smoked the inside so it would not reflect. It had to be kind of non-reflective, and then you put the one tube inside the other, and you put an eyepiece and an objective lens that you could have a telescope and maybe look at the moon. And Dad saw an old brass bedstead and cut up the pieces, and sure enough, it worked. And he put it on a tripod, still up there at the old farm, that tripod, and you could look at the moon and see the craters, and it was a great interest as a kid. Well, since then, of course, up at Trail Ridge Ranch, we have a number of big telescopes, reflectors, and the ability to look at some interesting planets. But this business of astronomy, and how does this connect with the Bible? Well, Dr. DeYoung has a book with the foreword by John C. Whitcomb, no stranger to Crosstalk, entitled Astronomy and the Bible. And we say welcome, Dr. DeYoung. Good to have you with us today.
Well, thank you, Vic. Happy to be here.
This is an interesting topic, and as a point of personal interest, Colonel Irwin of the moon fame vehicle, the lunar rover that was there, was a guest shortly before the Lord took him home. And I remember he talked about how as they were departing the moon, he took his Bible and placed it on the control console of the lunar rover and opened it to the scriptures. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Well, just yesterday on Fox News was an atheist who is promoting the fact there is no God and this foolishness of believing in a creator. You know, I'm so glad that the heavens still declare the glory of God. Dr. DeYoung, the interesting thing about your book is that it says questions and answers. You know, the issues of origins and the universe is as fresh as this Newsweek, with the evolutionist astronomers are claiming that the universe contains marks of things that precede their Big Bang theory. Tell us why you chose the subject of astronomy for a creation science book.
Well, I think astronomy is just a wonderful area of nature, of studying all of creation. And when you think about it, the skies are 99% of all of creation. That fourth day when this was made was a very big day, the sun, moon, and stars. So just the glory is overwhelming. It's just a great area to consider how things go together with the Bible and science.
You know, I mentioned Trail Ridge, which is our camping facility, 385 acres up in Hillsboro, Wisconsin. And we have an athletic field that's about 1,000 feet long and 400 feet wide, flat as can be. And at night, when the stars are there, no glaring lights, you could almost reach up and pick the stars out of the sky. The beauty that's there, you cannot begin to believe. We sit here in the mercury vapor lights and all of the distractions and fail to see the total beauty that's there. But, you know, we see men like Michael Dowd traveling the country and promoting evolution in churches, would you believe? Why is getting this issue of origins right so crucial from the spiritual perspective?
Well, certainly the book of Genesis is the foundation of the Old Testament. It's where they have the origin of the earth and marriage and the importance of life. And this whole creation story, it is a beginning point, and other things kind of hinge on it. So this start is critical to understand and to appreciate.
You know, we think of the evidence of creation, and though we're not at least talking about brain surgery today. I remember being on a plane heading into Orlando, and I sat next to a fellow that he really didn't look too academic. He was there in his blue jean cutoffs and a muscle shirt, and kind of looking like I'll say it this way, a beach bum. And I was sitting next to him, and this was the row where there were 3 seats on the right side, and I was on the aisle seat, and I noticed as he was reading this book, it had a spine of about 3.5 to 4 inches, and as he opened the pages, almost every other page had a human brain on it. And so after he kind of relaxed his study for a moment, and I said, "That's a pretty heavy-looking book, isn't it?" "Yeah," he says, "I'm a brain surgeon." And he says, "Every time I open the human skull, the cranium, and I look at that brain," he says, "I am totally convinced there had to be a designer." You know, when we think of this, look at the world. Look at everything we see there. Why is there so much emphasis on water on the moon and also the new planets that are in space?
Well, we do see a lot about this in the media of NASA looking closely at the moon and looking for traces of water. And they have found some, not liquid water, but just molecules within the rocks. Of course, one idea is to make it possible to live on the moon. As we know, life requires water. But along with the idea of water comes the whole thought of life elsewhere and aliens. And you know, NASA, they follow the interest of people. And whenever they have a finding or an article about water or life in space, they get a lot of hits. People are interested in that topic, as if people are searching for water elsewhere or life in space. People seem to want to have answers. They want to have someone else to look at. Unfortunately, it's often not the creator, but they're kind of searching for something out there, and it drives the program.
Well, and that with the UFO emphasis, you know, the unidentified flying objects that so many have claimed to see or debated. I remember my kids when they were younger, a little girl across the street claimed that she had seen a UFO. She saw a UFO somewhere, and we were asking, where did she see it? "Well, I saw it in a picture." And I said, "Well, how did you know it's a UFO?" She says, "Because it said UFO right on the side of it." The issue, though, of, Star Trek and all of this stuff that's out there that has attracted the imagination of a nation for decades, and we think of the possibility, or is there life? But when we look at the planets, everybody's trying to push for a trip to Mars. I don't know who'd want to identify to volunteer for the trip, but I guess it would be a historic event. But the issue of could there have been? Is there evidence of life out there?
We've had a close look at the planets in our neighborhood in the solar system, and what we find is they're not friendly places. These typical planets either have no atmosphere or a poisonous atmosphere.
Methane gas.
Exactly.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
A temperature that's either too hot, like Venus at 900 degrees, or the outer planets hundreds of degrees below zero. They don't have the protective shields that the Earth has, a magnetic field, and other areas as well. The closer we look at all this, we can see the special preparation of Earth. I think that's one of the key findings from the whole space program, that there's no place like home.
Well, as we think of the planets and the emphasis on one or the other, I remember one evening up at camp, we got a planet in sight on one of these big telescopes, and I'm not sure which one it was, but you could see the moons surrounding it. And the kids were just awestruck, realizing that we were actually looking into outer space. It wasn't a star, it was a planet, and it was there. Now, there's been a lot of conjecture regarding planets and even what constitutes a planet. What happened to Pluto?
Well, Pluto, some of us are still sticking up for that planet, but apparently we've been pulled back to 8 in the solar system now. What happened is Pluto, as the outermost planet, was also the smallest. And in recent years, we've located other objects out there in that vicinity, some as large or even larger than Pluto, perhaps hundreds of these objects. Well, if we're going to continue to count Pluto, then all the other ones would also qualify, and then we need to come up with names of all of them, and the solar system suddenly has hundreds of planets. And so the decision was made by some astronomy authorities to kind of downgrade Pluto to call it a dwarf planet. And so we have the 8 large ones and many, many smaller objects. So it was just sort of an arbitrary call. We've done nothing to Pluto. It's still out there. And maybe it should have been grandfathered in and kept up as a planet. Many are in favor of that. But that's what happened, just new discoveries of neighbors of Pluto.
Well, it's not a dog, folks. It's a planet. It's out there. And now let's talk about some specific elements, such as the Star of Bethlehem. I mean, can we identify the Star of Bethlehem?
Every Christmas season, this shows up in the newspaper articles and in some planetarium shows. And whole books are written on trying to identify what it was that the wise men followed to the Christ child. And it kind of breaks down to 3 major natural approaches. Some say maybe the Star of Bethlehem was a comet. But of course, comets traditionally are associated with bad news. It doesn't fit the Lord. Some say maybe the comet was a gathering of planets, a conjunction, perhaps Jupiter and Saturn approaching each other close in the sky, which they do periodically. Others say, well, maybe the star was an explosion, a nova or a supernova. Interesting natural explanations. None of them really work very well. Now, the dates don't match up, the times. I think when you look closely at the story of the Star of Bethlehem in Matthew chapter 2, two points stand out. And one that we find is that it appears that the wise men were the only ones who saw this star. When they got to Jerusalem, Herod said, "What time did you see it?" He had stargazers. His men didn't seem to know about it. Everyone would have seen a planet or a comet. And then after the wise men leave Jerusalem, it says the star leads them to Bethlehem, which is a direction from north to south. Well, none of these natural objects move like that. Everything goes from east to west due to the rotation of the earth. I think when you put those side by side, you must conclude that the Star of Bethlehem is not a natural object at all. It was a supernatural, a temporary light in the sky that the Lord used for the wise men, and then it was taken away, and so it's futile to try to explain it. In other words, I would take it as a miracle. And when you think about the Old and New Testament, the Lord often used lights to guide people, to show his presence.
Interesting, and we're going to be asking some more questions and even giving some folk an opportunity to call in. By the way, this book that I'm holding in my hands has 100 questions about astronomy and the Bible. And if I started out here, we could be here for hours and hours and hours, and I know that Dr. Don would be thrilled to answer those questions. However, the book is available, and a copy of this book, Astronomy and the Bible, Questions and Answers. One copy is available if you'd like to make a donation of $18 to VCY America. We'll be glad to send a copy out to you. 2 copies for a donation of $30. If you'd like to call, the phone number is 800-729-9829. We'll be right back with more of Crosstalk here on VCY.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, creation author with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, you say that there was no death before Adam sinned. But what about plants? Didn't Adam eat plants?
Yes, Chris, Adam and Eve did eat plants in the Garden of Eden. But was this really death in the biblical sense? There's a profound theological distinction between plants and animals in the Bible. Both man and the animals are described as having life, Hebrew nephesh, which plants don't have. The term life is reserved for those animals in whose nostrils is the breath of life, and also by the fact that life is in the blood. Plants have neither breath nor blood. Thus, the eating of a plant in the Garden of Eden wouldn't necessarily involve death. Plants are biologically alive, but they're not biblically alive in the sense that they do not have true life. You see, Chris, there's always an answer to the anti-creationist questions. Back to Genesis. Now that works.
Thanks, Dr. Morris.
And welcome back to Crosstalk as we continue in a very interesting program here. Again, we're talking to the author of this book and also a man who is the president of the Creation Research Society, chairman of the Department of Physical Science at Grace College, Winona Lake, Indiana. He has taught at Grace since 1972 with sabbatical leave spent in San Diego and the South Pacific. Dr. DeYoung is also on the faculty of the Institute for Creation Research in San Diego. Courses taught include physics, astronomy, and mathematics. He speaks on creation topics and believes that the details of nature are a powerful testimony to the Creator's care for mankind. His writings have appeared in the Journal of Chemical Physics and the Creation Research Society Quarterly. He's also written 8 books on Bible science topics, including Object Lessons for Children. Dr. DeYoung was with us on Crosstalk last year, talking about his book, Discovery of Design. He's back here with us today, and we're very grateful to say that if you'd like a copy of this new book, it's called Astronomy and the Bible, Questions and Answers. And if you'd like to get a copy, it's available for a donation of $18 to the Ministry of VCY America. Or if you'd like 2 copies, a donation of $30 to the ministry here, and we'd like to send these out as our way of saying thank you. Dr. DeYoung, as we were talking momentarily there about the Star of Bethlehem, I know that the Bible speaks of a greater light that rules the day. Just how great is the greater light?
Well, that's a reference to the sun, the greater light that rules the day, and the size is beyond our imagining. It's 93 million miles out there, so it may look small in the sky, and we feel the warmth of the sun, but if you get close to it, very large. We might just consider an analogy. If the sun were to be hollow, let's say like a basketball, well, then if you would poke a little hole, how many planet Earths could you fit inside the sun? If you do the math, the number is 1 million. 1 million Earths would fit inside the sun. They'd be like little BBs inside a basketball.
Oh my.
And of course, the sun is not hollow. It's filled with million-degree temperatures and radiation and chemicals and energy. In fact, speaking of energy, the sun gives off more energy in 1 second than mankind has produced since Adam and Eve. Every second, and of course, that's 24/7. It never ends. And yet, the sun has plenty of fuel. Its gas gauge is still on full for this whole age that we live in. It's actually converting hydrogen to helium, and God gave it a great supply. So that's the kind of energy machine that the sun is. And then when you look at the nighttime stars, they're all suns. Some are larger than the sun, some are smaller. So it just makes us consider the infinite energy supply of the Lord when he cast all of those suns or stars into the sky.
Well, as we think of the greater light that rules the day, and of course we just talked about the lesser light, that moon, and the exploration that's gone on. And again, I don't know how many would want to volunteer to live up there. It's not so much the environment. It gets a little cool up there at night. And the distance traveled between there and the Earth, I'm sure they'll come up with something that's maybe a faster train. Now, has England's Stephen Hawking proved a self-existing universe?
Well, Dr. Hawking came out with a book this year, and in it he claims to have solved the problem and can now explain the origin of the whole universe without any outside intervention, no need of a creator. He would not say that he is denied the existence of a creator. He just simply says he doesn't need him. It's an interesting statement that he makes. Well, there's great intellect there, and Hawking does a lot of very deep physics and analysis, a brilliant man. But I notice in this book, and as he makes these findings, he's making use, for instance, of the laws of physics and quantum mechanics, these faithful laws that have been set up and are unchanging that run the whole system. He doesn't answer the question of where those laws come from. Now, another part of Hawking's whole program, his whole view, is that there are many universes, and we happen to live in one where everything is just right so that we can exist and live here. This is a popular idea today of multiple universes to try to make it a whole statistical group, and sooner or later one is bound to turn out the right way like ours is. Of course, there's no evidence for multiple universes. There's no way to measure another one. So I think Dr. Hawking has kind of gone off the edge here into metaphysics. He's gone beyond physics with many universes, and he's using, again, the rules and laws that the Lord set up during the creation week and for his own explanation.
Well, and as you see them going to the infinitely distant philosophies, something that can't be proven. You know, these guys who are so busy proving things are expecting us to believe that by faith, because you can't see it.
Yes, well, science seems to have this, reputation that what they say is fact, and you better believe it. And so maybe it gets a little bit too much respect. I do notice that Hawking's theory changes from year to year. These different natural origin theories roll on by, and it never settles down. Of course, the Bible, the good book, does not change and spells out the right method.
Now, what are some of the most common questions that you get regarding astronomy in the Bible that you cover in your book?
Well, a typical question might be, how do we know how far away stars are? We can't go to another star in this lifetime, and the distances are vast, so how can we really tell? Some might say, well, they look like little Christmas lights. They're not that high in the sky. But stars are very large, and they are a long ways away. And what's happened in recent decades and centuries, we have come up with methods to measure the distance to stars. Now, these distances come out to be in millions of miles, into light years, and many, many light years. And the methods aren't exact. When you hear a distance to a star, such as Polaris, the North Star, being 400 light years away, it's probably plus or minus 5% or 10%, but they are a long ways out. We can do this by measuring angles in the sky from one month to the next, kind of like surveyors do triangulation as you look at a star from different places in our orbit. You can look at different properties of stars. Some stars we really do know how bright they are, and so when it's way far away in space, it appears dimmer. In fact, we use the same method, Vic, when we're looking, driving down the road. If you see the headlights of a car, you can judge how far away it is by how bright the headlights are. And in a similar way, we can quantify that and use that to measure star distances. So that's one typical question, the distance to stars.
You know, the term that you used a moment ago is something that people don't often, in normal conversation, talk about light years. But when you say 400 light years away, we're talking about the light that we're seeing traveling at the speed of 186,000 miles a second started out 400 years ago, and the light we're seeing today in a particular dimensional thing. 186,000 miles a second, because light and RF radio frequencies travel at similar speeds. Perhaps not accurately here, but enough to be in the same class. But here we're seeing light years away, and the measurement, as you've come up with this, and all of this working like a giant clock, whereby we can judge the times and the seasons and navigate the mariners on board a ship by utilizing their sextant, able to navigate across the vast oceans and to realize that it's reliable. It could only have come from a designer.
Very true. That concept of a light year, it's just one of the benchmarks of astronomy. A light year is about 6 trillion miles, and that's how far light would go in a year if it didn't bump into anything, and space is like that. There's plenty of room out there. And within reason, then you are looking back in time. When you look at the night sky, you might see a star whose light has been traveling since the day you were born. Now, I would suggest that the stars that are very distant, millions or billions of light years away, that that light could have been embedded in space at the moment the stars were made. I don't believe that we have to wait for that light to come all the way to us across space. In other words, that light could have been made with the star. I believe Adam and Eve, if they had gone out their very first evening, would have seen the sky much as we do, that the starlight was made fully functioning.
I remember back in the days of Herod the King when I was a kid. I say that, and my grandkids grown. But in all seriousness, in Pasadena, California, I remember being up on Mount Wilson, and I think they called that a 100-inch telescope, or was it I think it was a 100-inch telescope up there in Mount Wilson. And then Palomar came on duty. What was that, a 200-inch?
That's 200 inches, and that still is a very valuable telescope.
But then somebody came up with the idea of putting a telescope out in space. Whatever happened to that thing?
Well, that's the Hubble telescope, which is still being used. Now
they did a repair job on it, didn't they?
Right at the start they did, and several upgrades over the years. Now that mirror is smaller than Palomar. It's about maybe an 8-foot mirror. It had to fit in the space shuttle, but to get above the atmosphere made all the difference. And that Hubble telescope has shown us great glory and variety in deep space.
I'm a pilot, and sometimes as I'm flying say there's a moon rising on the horizon, and as you see the moon, it looks huge. And then as it goes higher in the sky, it somehow, mysteriously, gets smaller. Tell us how.
That's an interesting one, Vic. We call that the moon illusion. All I can say is when the moon is just coming up, for perhaps a big full moon, if you would measure it somehow, hold out your hand or a ruler and catch the size, and do it again 6 hours later when the moon is high in the sky, it's the very same size. Our eyes play tricks on us. Apparently, when the moon is close to the horizon, when it's just coming up, you're somehow comparing it with trees, or it looks like it should be closer to you, and so your mind somehow tells you that it looks extra large, but it's not refraction or reflection. It's really the same size when it gets higher in the sky, as you can test for yourself.
Well, I'm glad you cleared that up, because I always wondered about that, and I wondered if it was the atmosphere being a magnifying lens, but you have corrected my thinking. Well, we're going to take a break here in about a minute. And we're going to open our phone lines, because I know many of you may have questions, and I've got 100 questions. If you don't call with your questions, I'm going to start reading them out of this book. But I really want you to get a copy of the book. It's called Astronomy and the Bible, Questions and Answers by Dr. Donald B. DeYoung. And the foreword was written by John Whitcomb, who was with us just a few weeks back. And I know that you'll find this a treasure, not only for the kids in your family, but for you as an adult, that you read this and some answers that maybe you didn't have. One copy for a donation of $18 to the Ministry of Crosstalk, 2 copies for a donation of $30. And if you'd like to call 800-729-9829, 800-729-9829. We'll be back in a minute. This is Crosstalk.
The world around us provides irrefutable evidence of our Creator. But when challenged, can you defend your faith? Do you have answers to questions about evolution, creation, and a biblical worldview? Now available to help equip you is the New Answers 3 book, featuring Ken Ham and leading creation scientists, providing answers to a number of questions, including where was the Garden of Eden located? Is man the cause of global warming? What did Noah's Ark look like? What about the similarity between human and chimp DNA? What about cloning and stem cells? What about kinds in Genesis? What is the best argument for the existence of God? Why is Mount St. Helens important to the origins controversy? And what are some good questions to ask an evolutionist? More than 24 diverse questions are addressed by leading creationists in the New Answers Book 3. Copies of the New Answers Book 3 are available from VCY for a donation of $18 or more by calling 1-800-729-9829. That's 1-800-729-9829.
welcome back to Crosstalk as we're talking about astronomy and the Bible. And for those that come along, and like the poor man, the atheist who was on Fox News this week, trying to give reason for his one lonely billboard, telling people not to believe that there were three wise men. It's all a myth. It's all fake. It's all whatever. And even the Fox News commentator seemed like she had some sympathy for this poor man and his disillusion. Well, you know something? Years ago, there was someone that came along with the great philosophy that God is dead. If there was one, he's dead now. But I found out that wasn't correct because I talked to him this morning. And if you know the Lord, let me tell you, and his word, and this book is absolutely terrific. It's got answers that you can understand. Right now, though, we're going to open our phone lines because we'd like to give you a chance to talk to Dr. DeYoung and maybe some comments about some of the books he's written. Maybe you have some questions specifically about astronomy in the Bible. Maybe you've got some homeschool kids that would like to get on the phone here. Our telephone number, I'm pressing the button right now, and the phone number is 800-733-9829. 733-9829, and we'll take your calls. Already, all but one line have lit up, so we're going to have some interesting conversations here. You have questions about astronomy and what's up there and all that beautiful thing that you see up in the sky, and your calls are more than welcome. All of our lines are jammed at this point, and when you hear us terminate one call, that means the line is clear. So if you put the number in your quick dial, you'll probably get through. But we'll take your calls. If you would, let us know where you're calling from, and keep your questions brief and to the point, because we're going to take as many calls as we can. Our guest today, Dr. Donald B. DeYoung, and the author of the book, Astronomy and the Bible, Questions and Answers. And there's 100 questions that I see with diagrams and all kinds of neat things, pictures, and well, it's a terrific textbook. And here's a question. And to get things started before our first call, is the gospel spelled out in the stars? Question 48.
Well, this idea goes way back several centuries, that the constellations in the sky are pictures, and they spell out biblical history. There's Aquarius that has to do with water, perhaps referring to the flood. There's Virgo, a virgin, perhaps referring to the Virgin Mary. And so on. You can go with these constellations. All I can say is there may or may not be some credibility to this. The scripture really tells us to stay away from astrology and constellations. And we've got God's sure word, so we don't need stars to guide us.
Well, we shall continue with our phone calls, and we will take those phone calls. Even my cell phone got excited here for a moment. Maybe it wanted to ask you a question. So much for the cell phone. Right now, let's go to our first call, Franklin, Wisconsin, and we're going to talk to Maynard. And Maynard, you're on the air with Dr. DeYoung.
Am I on the air?
You're on the air, sir.
Okay, Dr. DeYoung. Several years ago, 9 large, I guess they're asteroids or maybe larger, hit the planet of Jupiter or Saturn?
Jupiter.
Jupiter. How did it come about, or can you fill me in? How did that happen, that 9 of them came in that length of time and hit, they probably hit one right after another?
Yes, well, thank you, Maynard. It was Jupiter, which is the largest planet, which attracts things like this. The story was there was a comet, and it was actually shredded into several pieces, so they were all still on the same path, more than a dozen, really. And so it went from one object to several strung out. And because of the strong gravity of Jupiter, they were pulled in, and over several hours, several days actually, these large objects did strike Jupiter. Now, Jupiter's gaseous, so they would just disappear into that, but a lot of heat, a lot of kinetic energy, major explosions to watch. And the interesting thing is, Maynard, to see that is just a reminder that these outer planets, Jupiter and Saturn and such, they're much bigger than the Earth. They protect the Earth. They grab objects such as that, as comets or asteroids that might otherwise hit the Earth. they provide another protective barrier that kind of keep us safe. So it was a disintegrated comet.
You know, Dr. DeYoung, when we look at the moon and we see all those craters up there, could that be points of impact where something has struck the moon?
Well, they are. Almost all of them are impacts. The moon is somewhat like a museum with no air or wind or water. Whatever happens stays for a long time, and so it's collected these craters ever since creation. Now, there are so many of them that it does appear there was maybe a major cratering time at some point in history, whether it was after creation or during the flood, if that had solar system implications. But yes, those are impacts. And still today, occasionally, we see a major new crater form, so objects are still hitting the moon.
Oh, that's interesting. Recently, you've seen new craters show up then.
Well, by recently, let me say the last couple of centuries.
Okay, very good. Well, let's go to John, who's standing by in West Milwaukee. John, you're on the air with Dr. DeYoung.
Yes, afternoon. Revelation chapter 12, what would that be about?
Well, now these are end-time events, and what it reminds us is major things happening in the sky in the last days. Revelation has two different extremes. It talks about at one point where the sun is darkened, where apparently perhaps Earth's temperature drops, and there's another place where it says the Earth or the sun will scorch people, where the sun gets extra hot. All I can say is that in the end times, the weather, the climate, it's in God's control, but it's out of our control, and major things happen. I have noticed that we all depend on the weather, and if things change at least a little bit, it kind of gets people uneasy. And again, in the book of Revelation, where things happen quickly, major changes in the sky, and also stars or asteroids falling to the earth, a very fearful time for those who don't know the Creator when the very heavens are changing before our eyes.
We're going to move right along then to the state of Kansas, and Mark standing by. Mark, you're on the air with the Dr. DeYoung.
Dr. DeYoung, I wanted to ask a question, and then I wanted to get off the phone to be able to hear your answer. But I'm a pastor, and I meet people. A lot of them are from the emerging church, that emergent mindset, and they're fascinated with lining up or defining theology by quantum physics. Do you have any idea how you could help me understand what they're trying to do?
Well, thank you, Pastor. Quantum physics, quantum mechanics is a modern area of study that's arisen over the last 100 years, and there are many different aspects to it. It kind of shows us our limitation, really, of the understanding of nature. Just a few examples that come from this quantum world. It appears to us, for instance, that something like an electron, if you remember that subatomic particle of an atom, can be spread out. It can be in two places at once. It becomes something like a wave that can be dispersed. Another part of quantum physics, which is very mysterious, is that we can have particles that appear to be coupled. You can have these two particles close together, and then if you separate them even by many miles, when you adjust one particle, the other one instantly responds. Sort of like there's some kind of invisible connection and even between particles at a distance. We don't understand this at all, how that works. It just shows us that there's a lot to physics that we don't understand. Now, I want to be careful. Quantum physics is it's not replacing God. It's not replacing creation. God understands it. He made it all in the first place, whether or not we understand it. Some may take these ideas and, connect New Age belief to them, but you don't have to go that direction. It's just the physics that we don't understand yet. It certainly does not conflict with Scripture.
Well, even in a more simplistic form, which may not qualify for quantum physics, but we sit here with a 1 million-watt television transmitter and making pictures on something in somebody's house. So that I'm sure that wouldn't fit, but I thought it was humorous. We're going to go to Dennis right now in Twin Lakes, Wisconsin. And Dennis, you're on the air. Hello?
Yes.
You're on the air, sir.
I'm sorry. Hi, Vic. Dr. DeYoung, just an observation. Space itself now, we know that it has no end. We know that there never was a time when it could not have been. Your observations on, I think that space and God himself are inseparably intertwined. It also explains how he can be everywhere at once. Yeah, your thoughts?
Well, thank you, Dennis. You say space has no end, and that's true as far as we know. Every year, new instruments look further and further, whether space is infinite, whether the number of stars are, or just how far it goes. We don't know. It's in God's hand, but it certainly is large. You say God and space are intertwined. That may or may not be true. When we have in the creation story, or even in the New Testament where it summarizes it, and it says all things were made by God, visible and invisible, whether that includes space being made during the creation week, we simply don't know. Certainly God is eternal. The space that we know today with stars and galaxies that are living and then wearing out, I believe that that's all part of the creation week.
Let's go across the nation to Klamath Falls, Oregon, and we're going to talk right now to Chuck. Chuck, you're on the air with Dr. DeYoung.
Yes, Dr. DeYoung. I have a website, and I've dedicated it to the constellations. But when I look at Ursa Major, I guess that's called the Great Bear, I see in wintertime it looks like a woman with eagle's wings. And I read in Revelation chapter 12 about a great sign in heaven of a woman with eagle's wings. And I also see that Orion is fighting against a dragon with his mouth wide open to his left. Have you seen either of these?
Well, thank you, Chuck. And I do hear your description, and I think I've seen those same descriptions in print as well. You mentioned Ursa Major, which is the Big Dipper. By the way, in England they call that the plow. And then you add some other details you're looking at. That's perhaps a caution when it comes to our earlier idea of the gospel and the stars. There are interesting pictures and patterns, and I think they've been there since day 4 of Creation Week when they were put in the sky. But, this is open to different interpretations of just what you would combine and tell about these constellations. A person could make up their own story. It may be that before Scripture was available, early in history, even before the Old Testament, that these constellations had more of a purpose and were object lessons in the sky. And maybe they were pointed out even to Adam and Eve by the Lord. Now today, where we have God's Word, that the sky, at least the constellation story, is no longer needed, but they still are there for us to enjoy. Whether they give the kind of detailed pictures that you're describing, we're uncertain of that.
We're going to be right back with our guest, Dr. Donald DeYoung, and he's the author of the book Astronomy in the Bible, and we'll talk about how you can get a copy of that book. Stick with us. This is Crosstalk.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Why is it that some of our nation's leaders, pastors, locked arms with Glenn Beck on the 828 rally? Why would they lock arms with a Mormon who denies the cross of Christ? Before Glenn has said he's a Mormon, that 70% of his life revolves around the Mormon temple. And Mormons believe the cross of Christ is foolishness, and thus you will not find a cross in or on top of a Mormon temple. Why would they lock arms with a self-confessed Mormon who believes, as Mormons do, the blood of Jesus Christ shed on the cross is not what saves us, and thus they won't use red wine or grape juice in their communion cups, but they use water. Mormons believe that salvation is not found in placing your faith and trust in Jesus Christ alone, but in good works. And Mormons believe that every man can become a god, that God himself was a man of flesh and bone who evolved to become a god. Why have our Christian leaders locked arms with a man who preaches another Jesus and another gospel? This is a sign of the last days.
And welcome back to Crosstalk, where we're talking about astronomy, and we're talking with a man who's an authority on it, Dr. Donald DeYoung. And the book we're talking about is Astronomy and the Bible. And if you'd like to get a copy of this book, it's filled with questions and answers, 100 questions, and lots of vital information, diagrams, and things that you will enjoy. And it's good for kids. It's good for adults as well. Now, if you'd like a copy, a donation of $18 to Crosstalk, and the address, if you'd like to send it in, is Crosstalk, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, 53208. That's 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, 53208. Or you can call 800-729-9829. One copy, a donation of $18. For two copies, a donation of $30. So if you pick up the phone, Mary will be standing by to take your calls even as we speak. Also, just a reminder to our listening friends in the Milwaukee area that that's Tuesday, November 30th. That's today at 7:15 p.m. He will be speaking at the Grace Bible Church, located at 2643 South 117th Street in West Allis. That's at 2643 South 117th Street in West Allis at 7:15 p.m. tonight. So if you'd like to be there, and the topics, discovery of design, and also topic 2, astronomy and creation. It'll be a very interesting program. We urge you to attend if you're within driving distance. Okay, we're going to go back to the phones, and let's see, where are we? Let's go to Jacksonville, Oregon, and we're going to talk to Leah. Leah, you're on the air.
Yes. I have your book sitting right here in front of me, so I'll be very anxious to read it right away. But I wanted to ask you, the Star of Bethlehem movie that came out, what is your opinion of that? And I'll just take that on the air.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Leah, for the question. I believe you're referring to a movie or DVD that attempts to explain the Star of Bethlehem. Again, this is almost an annual occurrence. And the popular idea that's been going around today is that the star was a gathering or a conjunction of planets and a particular constellation. And this caught the eye of the wise men and got them on their journey. And then the two planets moved apart and then back together again. The second part of the story, when it leads the wise men to Bethlehem. Actually, this whole approach of a conjunction of planets, it's been around a long time. Even Johann Kepler liked this idea 400 years ago, so it seems to keep coming back again. It's an interesting story, but I think it has some weaknesses. For one thing, in Matthew chapter 2, it talks about a star, a singular word. Mm-hmm. Well, whenever you have planets, even though they come close together, it's multiple lights. They never exactly overlap. Furthermore, these conjunctions occur quite frequently, that is, every decade or so. It's not a unique occurrence that would have stood out that much to the wise men. And maybe just a third idea, to say that this conjunction occurred in a special constellation that was favored with the Jewish people. If you do the research on this, there's not a lot of history to that. I think back perhaps in the Middle Ages, people added a whole lot to this story, saying that constellations meant certain things to certain countries. Certainly the Bible does not say that Pisces or any other constellation means something special to Israel. I would conclude that the Star of Bethlehem is beyond explanation, that it was a temporary light in the sky that the Lord put there and then took away. And of course, Leah, the less the Bible says about these things, the more we wonder and speculate. And maybe speculation is okay, but I think these artificial natural explanations are weak.
Okay, we were about to take our call from Virginia and Katie there, but we see that she's dropped off the line here. Let's go to our final call, James in Milwaukee. And James, you're on the air.
Hello.
Hello. You're on the air, James. Go ahead.
Thank you. Dr. DeYoung, I'd like to thank you for your book. I'm going to be getting it soon. I'm a homeschool student. I love the topic of astronomy. But I'd like to know your opinion on black holes and white holes, because there are a lot of different views on a lot of the Christian books I've been reading. For example, Jonathan Henry says that they don't exist, whereas Russell Humphreys says they do. And I was wondering, what do you think about that?
Good question.
Well, thank you, James, and keep up those studies. And astronomy is just an excellent area to combine science and math and creation studies. Black holes, they're theoretical. They've been around for 2 centuries. That is the idea of them, that some stars, when they flame out, when they run out of energy, they collapse, get smaller and smaller, and finally their gravity is so strong that even light can't escape. We call them black holes. They would be a dead star. Now, no black holes have been observed with certainty, and there are ways to do this. Not that you can see the black hole, but if it is shredding a nearby star, you would see X-rays, or you might see a star orbiting a point in space. We see a few of these locations, but there are other possible explanations. There may be many black holes, or there may be none. I really expect that there are such things and even stranger objects in space, but we still are waiting for a definitive proof of a black hole. A white hole would be a different case where matter is coming out of a point in space, and instead of being pulled in like a black hole, that new matter is being emitted. That becomes much more speculative, and then we can talk about wormholes that connect a black hole with a white hole. There may be such things, but we are decades, if not centuries, away from verifying that sort of thing. It kind of gets into the realm of science fiction. Really, James, we know so little about space and deep space. We don't even know the origin of the moon from a natural viewpoint, let alone talking about deep objects, but it's a wonderful area to study.
Our guest today, Dr. Donald DeYoung, who is the author of the new book, Astronomy and the Bible, Questions and Answers. If you'd like to get a copy, call the number 800-729-9829. And in Milwaukee, tonight at 7:15, Grace Bible Church, 2643 South 117th Street in West Allis. Dr. DeYoung, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for being with us on Crosstalk.
To Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a cassette or CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208. Or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.